It began on an ordinary afternoon, the kind of day when the city feels heavy with routine. Cars hummed past in endless rhythm, pedestrians shuffled from one obligation to the next, and no one seemed to notice the man on the corner except those who needed a moment to feel generous. He was dressed plainly, not ragged enough to repel sympathy, but weary enough to spark concern. He held no sign, asked for nothing outright, but seemed stranded, an engineless figure by the curb beside a car that wouldn't start. He had the look of someone caught in misfortune, the kind of look that pulled at the natural instinct to help. People stopped. That was the trick. He never flagged anyone down. He simply stood helpless until a stranger's conscience reached for him. Sometimes it was a student with little to offer but enthusiasm, other times a businessman in a pressed shirt who felt he could spare a few minutes to do good. They asked if he needed a hand, and he always began with a grateful smile, a sigh of relief as if salvation had come. The story flowed easily from his lips. His phone had died, he had no cash, he needed a ride to fetch a fuel can, or just a few dollars to get him back on the road. It changed depending on the listener, shaped like wet clay to fit whatever kindness was on offer. Those who drove him often did so proudly, feeling the satisfaction of good deed done. He kept them talking, weaving little details about his life, how his mother was waiting, how his shift was about to start, how he hated imposing but had no choice. His words were always humble, always touched with embarrassment, just enough to make people trust his sincerity. Sometimes he accepted small bills pressed into his hand. Other times he vanished into a convenience store and never returned, leaving his helper waiting in a car that wasn't even his. It was not desperation that fueled him, but design. Each interaction was calculated, each pause rehearsed. He knew when to glance at his watch, when to shake his head as though weighing pride against need. He knew that kindness worked best when mixed with guilt, and he understood how quickly people wanted to believe they had made a difference. They never doubted because doubting kindness felt wrong. One evening, a young woman offered him her charger when he said his phone had died. He hesitated too long, the story slipping in his hands. She watched his eyes dart and recognized the flicker of performance. When she pressed further, asking which model his car was, why it lacked plates, his practiced charm faltered. She stepped back, and the kindness drained from her face. He muttered something about a misunderstanding and disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind the faint echo of suspicion. But most days, the world moved too quickly to notice the inconsistencies. For every wary skeptic, there were 10 others eager to believe in the image of a man down on his luck. His scam thrived on that impulse, on the human need to be good, to be useful, to be a rescuer in the quiet drama of a stranger's day. Weeks turned into months, and his figure became almost ghost-like in the city, appearing in new places, always with a broken story to match a broken car. People who had once helped him never saw him again, and so their kindness remained intact, untarnished by the truth. The money, the rides, the favors piled into his pockets, like the coins of a beggar who never begged. He was not cruel, not violent, not the kind of criminal that newspapers wrote about. He lived in the shadows between morality and fraud, thriving on the thin line where compassion blinded judgment. His scam was not about taking much, but about taking enough, enough to keep going, enough to turn generosity into sustenance. And so the city kept moving, unaware of how often its goodness was harvested. Strangers kept offering hands, kept giving rides, kept lending trust, never realizing they were players in the quiet theater of his con. The scam endured not because people were foolish, but because they were kind, and because in a world where suspicion is easy, kindness is still the rarest trick of all. He first tried the trick on a rainy evening when the city streets shimmered with neon reflections and everyone seemed in a rush to get home. The weather was perfect for his role, soaked jacket, damp hair plastered against his forehead, an air of quiet misery. He leaned against the hood of the car he'd borrowed for the day, its hood raised just enough to make it look broken. From a distance, he was the portrait of someone in need. It didn't take long before a man in his 30s stopped, holding an umbrella over them both. The Samaritan introduced himself cheerfully, asked if the engine wouldn't start, offered to give him a ride to the nearest gas station. The stranded man's smile trembled with gratitude. They drove off together, the helper making small talk, telling him about his own long day at work, asking polite questions. At the station, the stranded man excused himself to grab a can of fuel, thanked him profusely, and disappeared between the aisles. By the time the helper realized he wasn't coming back, the rain had thickened into a storm. The stranger went home wet, disappointed, and embarrassed. But the man with the scam counted that night as a success. He knew shame would keep his victim quiet, who wanted to admit they had been tricked by kindness. The swindled man might tell a friend over a beer someday, but by then it would be just another story, laughed off as a life lesson. His confidence grew. He shifted the story depending on the target. To mothers, he said his daughter was waiting at home, hungry. To students, he spoke of being late for class, dropping hints about scholarships and tuition struggles. To older men, he muttered about a boss who would fire him if he didn't get back to work. Each variation was tailored, crafted with care. He studied people's faces the way gamblers study dice, learning when to press harder, when to soften his plea. Yet, beneath the rehearsed humility, he was always watching. The way someone's fingers lingered near their wallet, the way their car smelled faintly of perfume, the way their eyes shifted when they questioned him. Every detail was catalogued, every reaction filed away for later use. It was not luck that fueled him, but observation. He was, in his own way, an artist. His medium was compassion, his canvas the guilt of strangers. One night, however, the performance cracked. He approached a woman in her 40s, well-dressed but tired-looking, and spun his usual tale of being stranded. She studied him for a long moment before offering her phone. He stalled, fumbling for excuses, but she pressed, insisting he make the call in front of her. Finally, she said in a low, measured tone, "You've done this before, haven't you?" Her words sliced sharper than he expected. She didn't shout, didn't call the police, just looked at him with disappointment, the kind that burned more than anger. For the first time, he felt something other than triumph. Shame prickled in his chest, though he quickly smothered it with a practiced retreat. He walked away, muttering, fading into the night. Still, the sting lingered. He had built his scam on the assumption that no one would ever peel back the mask. Most people never did. But the memory of her eyes followed him, and sometimes, when a stranger's kindness came too easily, he wondered if they, too, saw through him and chose silence anyway. The scam went on because the city was endless, because people forgot faces, because kindness was always there waiting to be tapped. Yet beneath the polished lies, beneath the steady flow of easy money and free rides, a question gnawed at him in the quiet hours. Was he surviving, or simply feeding on something he no longer believed in himself? The streets never answered. And so each day, he returned to the corner, to the hood raised just enough, to the weary sigh rehearsed 100 times. He played the part of the stranded man once more, waiting for the next Good Samaritan to step into the script, unaware they had wandered into a con. He chose his spots carefully, always near gas stations, parking lots, or the edge of a busy street, places where kindness was natural, almost expected. He never stayed too long in one neighborhood. He knew repetition was dangerous. If someone recognized him, even in passing, the illusion of helplessness would collapse. So he drifted, a shadow crossing districts, keeping his face just ordinary enough to be forgettable. One afternoon, just as the golden haze of late day softened the sharp angles of the city, he found his mark. A man in his 40s, with sleeves rolled up from office work, loosened tie, and a face still bright with the energy of someone who hadn't yet been crushed by routine. The stranded figure leaned on his car, hood up, sigh rehearsed, phone dead. The office man slowed, hesitated, then pulled over. The scammer noted the pause. Hesitation was good. Hesitation meant conscience battling convenience, and conscience usually won. The stranger asked if he needed help. "I hate to trouble you," the scammer murmured, eyes cast down as if ashamed. The businessman nodded with sympathy, asked where he needed to go. Within minutes they were in the man's car, heading toward the nearest gas station. Along the way, the scammer wove his usual tale. Single father, daughter waiting at home, work shift starting soon. He made his voice crack at just the right moments, placed pauses like punctuation marks where sympathy might grow. The businessman smiled, reassured him, even said, "Don't worry. I've been in your shoes." That was all the scammer needed. He knew then that this one would give more than a ride. He would give money too. And he did. At the counter, the businessman pulled out cash, pressed into the scammer's hand when the clerk wasn't looking. The scammer hesitated, feigned resistance, then accepted, whispering thanks as though it were salvation itself. But something unexpected happened. Instead of driving him back and dropping him off, the businessman insisted on waiting with him, insisted on carrying the fuel, insisted on making sure the car started. For the first time in months, the scammer felt panic beneath the mask. He mumbled excuses, but the businessman brushed them aside. When they reached the corner, the car was gone. The scammer froze, heart hammering in his chest. He fumbled, muttered that it must have been towed. The businessman narrowed his eyes, suspicion seeping in. There was a silence that stretched too long, a silence heavy with truth. The scammer turned and fled. He didn't explain, didn't offer apologies. He just vanished into the maze of alleys, the businessman's shout chasing him, but not his footsteps. Later, as he sat on a crumbling stairwell catching his breath, he felt an unfamiliar weight pressing down on him. It wasn't fear. He had outrun fear years ago. It was exposure, the sharp crack in a mask he had polished too long. Yet even then, he knew he would return. The scam wasn't about money alone. It was about power, the ability to script another person's kindness, to orchestrate their guilt, to bend their better nature into his survival. Each lie was a thread, each performance a small stage, and he was addicted to the applause that came not in claps, but in pitying smiles and folded bills. Still, the image of the businessman's suspicious stare lingered. For days afterward, whenever he set up again, he felt phantom eyes on him, as though kindness itself was watching, beginning to doubt. He tried to shake it off, rehearsed the sighs again, polished the lies sharper. But deep inside, he wondered how long the city would keep believing, and how long he could keep playing the part of the Good Samaritan's mirror, reflecting kindness only to break it. The scam endured. It always would. Because for every wary stare, there would always be another stranger rushing to help, ready to give a piece of themselves to a story carefully spun to sound true. And he would take it as he always had, until the day the mask no longer worked.